hit record right now. Yeah, so I know it's never good to start with technical issues, but I've had to reboot my computer before jumping on here, and I couldn't get the chat function working. So for those of you that are already on, do me a favor, type in the chat, just type in where you're joining from so that I can see if that is working and if I can see it, so that if we can interact, we can. So for those of you that might be new to Zoom, you should have a little chat option at the bottom of your screens, and just type in there. Oh, great. So we've got people from Manchester, people from Ireland that I can see. That's fantastic. Great. And that means the chat is working. So that's wonderful. And obviously you can all hear me. That's great. And Worcester, I see. Hi, Adele. Right. I'm going to close that. So, okay. Technical issues aside, which is wonderful. And let's get started then. So this should be recording as well for you all. Now, I know some of you already know me, know a little bit about me, know a little bit about my story. But equally, there will be some of you on here that don't know that much about me. So I'm just going to start, before we get into today's slides, I'm going to start just with a really brief introduction to myself, and if you like, what's brought me here today and sharing this information with you all. Okay, so my name's Karen Mullins. I'm sure you all figured that one out. And as I say, I like to start really by, taking people back a couple of years. So today I work as a Procter & Gallagher consultant. I'm a success coach. And what that really means is that I take my clients through a really powerful personal development program called Thinking into Results. Okay, and I'm going to be sharing some of the ideas and some of the material in that program really with you today as we move through this area of self-image. But I like to start, as I say, just by taking people back a couple of years, because actually the person I was a couple of years ago is pretty different to the one sitting here before you today and sharing this information with you all. And self-image was probably one of the areas that I have made the biggest changes in. And I guess for you to understand that as we move through these slides, I just want you to be able to sort of place it against something, if you like. So if we go back a couple of years, at that point in my life, 2016, I was working as a chartered surveyor. Okay, so I was working in the corporate world, I'm doing something that I'd done for about 20 years, to be honest. And I was pretty happy. I always say to people, this isn't some dramatic kind of, midlife crisis, big turnaround sort of story. Actually, on the face of it, I was probably ticking lots of boxes of what success looked like, or certainly what it looked like to me. Okay, so I, had that good job. I was earning decent money, live in the nice house, drive the nice car, take the nice holidays. Lots of things, if you like, that I'd aspired to have back when I was in my early 20s. I'd kind of achieved by the time I was in my early 30s. And so for the sort of, following, I guess, 7 to 8 years, on the cusp of turning 40, which is where I was at just a couple of years ago, I felt like there was something missing. Even though I had all of these great things in my life, I felt like I wasn't quite living life on my terms. I didn't know what that missing piece was, but I was pretty sure there was one. So I was on a bit of a mission, if you like, to try and figure that out. And I got into my personal development, and it was really then, if you like, that I came across Bob Proctor. I was just listening to a podcast one day on my drive into work. I didn't know who he was, in all honesty. I'd never heard his name before, but this particular day he was being interviewed. And I was just fascinated really by what he was saying. He was talking, from memory, he was talking about the fact that we have choices. We always have choices in life, in terms of where we are, in terms of what we go on to do, and in terms of how we think of ourselves, which really links into what we're going to be talking about today. And it really got me thinking, about some of the choices I'd made in my life up until that point, and whether in fact I'd really made those choices, or whether I'd just gone along with what I thought I ought to be doing, and in terms of what everybody else in my sort of social economic group was doing. So it got me to sort of open my mind a bit about things like that. And I think more than what he was saying though, and more than this transformational story that he has, in terms of his own life, and if we get a chance, I'll dig into that a little bit as we go through the slides today. what really struck me more than anything was, here was this guy who just a couple of years ago was, I think he would have been 82, okay? And I was on the, verge of turning 40, so half his age. And here was this guy, so full of energy, so full of vitality, so passionate about what it was that he was doing and talking about, that more than anything made me sort of sit up and listen, if you like. And it made me realize that this missing piece that I thought I, was looking for, maybe this guy has, because, who is this person that at twice my age has twice my energy, and he didn't need to work. At this point, the guy's a multimillionaire. So whatever he was doing, he wasn't doing it for the money. He was doing it for the love of it. And as I say, that got me thinking. It got me opening my mind about where I was going, about, what sort of the future could hold for me. And that's really what I want to ask of each and every one of you on this call today, or listening back to the replay, is to give yourselves the gift of an open mind, okay? Because a closed mind won't accept a new idea. And some of the things that I'm going to talk to you about over the next hour, you might not have heard before. Some of them I'm sure you will have done, and then other bits I might just put them across in a slightly different way, okay? But I always like to say to people, when I do these events, and oftentimes I'm doing them live rather than in this sort of webinar format, but I'll say to people, this session, if you like, it's not actually about me. It's not about me and my story, and it's not about Bob Proctor and his. It's actually about you guys, okay? It's about each and every one of you. And what I want to talk to you about today, as I say, is something that's so close to my heart, because the person that sits before you today, if you like, this person that I am today, sort of owning my own business, doing something so completely different to anything that I'd ever done before, required a huge shift in how I thought about myself, in what I thought I was capable of doing. So it really fits hugely into this whole area of self-image, which is what we're going to dig into now, really, as we start to move through these slides, all right? So the things that we're going to look at, first of all, is this idea of, well, what exactly do we mean when we talk about your self-image? Why is it so important? How exactly is it controlling my results? So kind of, why is it such a big deal, Karen? What you need to do to change it. So if there's any area of your life right now where you feel like you'd like to see some improvements, you'd like to see something different, what you could start to do, what are the kind of things that you'd need to do to change it? And then finally, the one thing that you can do, the idea, if you like, that you can act on today, before you even sort of leave this webinar, if you like. So let's get into it, guys. I'll keep my eye on the time because I know you've all probably got super busy days. I want to start here, all right? When we talk about self-image, I think the first thing I want you all to understand and realize is that there's kind of two parts to your self-image, really. There's the side of your self-image, if you like, that we all know, quite obviously, that external image, the part of us that we see when we look in the mirror, the side of ourselves that we project to other people, the way we walk, talk, act, present ourselves, dress. That's your external self-image, okay? But we also have an internal self-image. And that's really the one that I'm going to be talking to you about today. And I guess more than anything, I want you to realize that it's actually the internal self-image, if you like, that's reflected on the outside anyway. So that exterior self-image, the way that you present yourself to other people, how other people see you, really more than anything is a reflection of actually how you see yourself. So it's the image that you hold of yourself, the way that you see yourself, that is what we're going to be looking at today. And that actually is really the key to what you go on to achieve, okay? Because you'll never outperform your own self-image. That's something that I really want you all to sort of take on board, okay? So I want you to start off here with asking yourselves this question. And it seems like it's quite a big one for a Thursday lunchtime, right? But who are you, right? And what I mean by that is, how do you think of yourself, okay? When I ask somebody, like, okay, well, who really are you? You might be tempted to answer with your name, well, okay, I'm Karen Mullins. But really, if you think about it, none of us are our names. That's just a label, if you like, that we identify with. If we wanted to, each and every one of us could actually go and start the process of changing our name tomorrow if we wanted to. Okay. Now, I have no desire to do that, so I'll probably use the name Karen Mullins to identify myself, you know, for as long as I live. But there are other names and other labels, if you like, that we also use to identify ourselves. You know, I've just used a few with you, you know, as I introduced myself here this morning. I said, you know, I'm Karen Mullins and I'm a success coach. Well, that's another label. It's not really who I am, though. It's just something that I'm identifying with right now. In the same way that, you know, again, when I was describing to you all, you know, what I used to do, I said that I was a chartered surveyor. It's another label. That's something else that I identified with. And I did that for a long time. I did that for the best part of 20 years. And you see, it's these labels that we use on ourselves, okay, that we identify with, that kind of also place limits around us. I guess that's the bit that I want you also to see and to take on board. We've all got lots of labels, okay? I've got plenty more, and I'm sure each and every one of you do. And again, if you want to type in the chat, let me know some of the labels that you would identify with. I'd love to hear some. But, you know, for instance, I'm also a mum. I'm also a wife. I'm also, you know, a daughter. All my life, people have called me a chatterbox. There's another label, right? Like I grew up with that one, and I tend to still associate with it. So we've all got a bunch of labels, and depending on how we look at ourselves within those, so that idea of what is your idea of a mum? What is your idea of yourself as a father, as a husband? How do you see yourself? You know, again, I used to be an employee. Now I'm a business owner. I could say that, you know, I'm a CEO, if you like, of my own company. And again, what kind of sort of ideas do those labels conjure up? So hopefully you're getting the idea that some of maybe the labels that we use about ourselves to identify with will be good, they'll be powerful, they'll be strong, but others might not be necessarily the sort of, well, the idea that we want to identify with. And again, people will have different perceptions depending on where they come from. So what I want you all to do, again, as we sort of just move through these slides together, first of all, yes, think of those labels. Think of some of the ways that you have been used to identifying yourself, the way that you're used to thinking of yourself and who you are and what you can do, whether you think of yourself as, you know, confident, whether you think of yourself as outgoing, an introvert, you know, any or all of these sorts of ideas are concepts that you have of yourself, okay? And what I want to ask you all to do, as well as obviously giving yourselves the open mind that I've already asked, for the next, you know, 45 minutes or so that we're going to be together, I want you to just let go of some of those labels a little bit, okay? You can pick them back up again when we end this webinar, but just maybe let go of your hold on them a little bit. Just keep that open mind about who you are, and don't be sort of boxed in necessarily by some of these labels and the way that you have been used to identifying with yourself, okay? And I want you actually to come at that from, if you like, this idea of the other quote that you can see on the screen in front of you right now. This is taken from something that Bill Gove said. Now, Bill Gove was a mentor of Bob Proctor's. And I love what he says here. He says, if I'm going to be free, I've got to be me. And he went on to say, not the me I think you think I should be. Not the me I think my wife or my husband thinks I should be. Not the me I think my kids think I should be. You're getting the picture, right? If I'm going to be free, I've got to be me. So I'd better know who that me is. And that's why, guys, I want you all to just let go of some of these sort of, if you like, conditioned ideas of who you are, the way that you've lived your life up to this point, that's then, you know, formed this image that you have of yourself, that internal self-image. Just let go of them a little bit and keep that open mind. And I want, if I can, to give you one more idea. All right, I want you all to take this on board and start to think of this as part of your self-image. Because the truth is that whilst for many of us, we won't have been responsible necessarily for consciously forming the ideas of who we are and the self-image that you're sitting with here today, but the truth, the beautiful truth for all of us is we can absolutely create a self-image, a powerful self-image, exactly as we want, that's in harmony with the good that we desire. Okay, so I want you all to take on just one more idea for me. And that is that you are actually the highest form of creation on this planet. that there is nothing else that will equal you. Okay, that you are so unique. There is nobody else alive that is exactly like you. Okay, and the truth for all of us is that we actually all have infinite potential. We can do anything that we want if we really want it. Okay, anything that you really want, that you really put your mind to, you actually can go on to achieve. Okay, now they might sound like some really big ideas to you right now, and you might actually find some of them hard to believe, all right? And if that's the case, then again, just keep that open mind and borrow my belief in you just for the next 45 minutes as we sort of progress through some of these slides, okay? Because that's really the way that I want you to be thinking, okay? And bear that in mind, guys, as we move on to this next slide here, because I want you to all ask yourselves this next question, all right? And we're going to get into self-image in a lot more detail in a minute. But before we do that, I want you to just ask yourselves, what is it that you want, all right? And bear in mind, if you're coming at it from the point of view of somebody that's actually got infinite potential, okay, that you can do anything that you want, it's really important that you start to figure out what that is, you know, what that looks like for you. Because many of us, especially adults, actually come at this question of what we want more with what we think we can get oftentimes. We're boxed in by those labels again, right? That we see ourselves as, well, I'm a mum now, I couldn't do that. Or how I used to look at myself, you know, well, I'm a chartered surveyor, I've qualified, I've worked hard for this, and I've done it for, 20 years. What else could I possibly do? And those were ideas that kept me locked in to a certain way of thinking, and therefore blocked off certain opportunities that actually were always available to me, but I just didn't see that they were. Okay, so start to think of it for yourselves in terms of, okay, well, if I couldn't possibly fail, then what does that look like? If I just forget some of these labels that I've lived with, and just for the next 40 minutes or so, start to think from a point of view of having infinite potential, what does that look like? And if for some of you, again, that's maybe the first time you've ever really started to think in those sorts of terms, and I want to just give you a few little pointers of things, if you like, that we have discovered that everybody wants, okay? No matter where you are in the world, no matter your cultural background, no matter your upbringing, pretty much everybody wants 3 things, okay? Just 3 things. I'm sure we all want extras on top of these, okay, that are unique to us. But there are 3 things that pretty much everyone has in common, all right? The first one is this, okay? And that is that everybody would like to be free of financial concern, okay? Now, that doesn't mean that you were out there flying around in a private jet and living the life of a billionaire. And it might be that you want that, but actually, maybe not so surprisingly, not everybody does want that. In fact, not that many people do, all right? But everybody would like to live a life where money isn't restricting them. Money isn't restricting what they go on to do, okay, and how they spend their time, so they can take the holidays they want to take, they can stay in the hotels they want to stay in, treat their loved ones to whatever it is that they want. They're just not being held back by money, really. So it's just one less thing to worry about. They've really got true financial freedom. So that's the first thing that we've discovered that everybody wants. Okay, the second thing, one of my all-time favorites, is this one right here. And I just love this picture. Isn't it amazing? I'm picturing you all smiling right now, even though I can't see you. But we all want to wake up and feel enthusiastic about how we're going to spend our days. Now, I say, and I use this a lot in seminars that I do, and I say to people, actually, I think this should pretty much just be a basic human right, because otherwise, what is the point to life, quite frankly, if you're not ticking this box, all right? Now, in reality, no matter how good your life is, no matter whether you're absolutely doing what it is that you love, you'll have good days and bad days, right? But if, a bit like that Steve Jobs quote, if you are somebody that is for any length of time aware that the way that you are moving through your days isn't making you feel pretty much like this little girl in the picture, then you need to get honest with yourself and just question what it is that you are doing, okay? And really understand that regardless of whether you love or hate or feel a bit about whatever it is that you do, you're trading your life for it. Every day, no matter what you do, you're trading your life for that thing that you're going out to do. So we really want to make sure that how we are showing up for ourselves in our places of work, in our businesses, in our homes, with our families, we really want to make sure that we are ticking this box, that it fills us up, that we are getting the best out of life and we are giving the best back, really. And then finally, the only other thing, and this sort of builds on number 2 really, that we've discovered that everybody wants, is they want positive relationships. They just want to be around people that make them feel good, all right? People that are like-minded, that are going where you're going, upbeat, know what they want, make you feel good, and you're doing the same for them. And that's kind of it. I mean, take a look at the screen, just those 3 things. If we come back to that idea that I want you all to build into your self-image, right, that you've got infinite potential, that you are so much more capable than you ever give yourself credit for. Look at what the human mind can create. When we really put our minds to it, sending a man up into space, having a space station floating around somewhere in orbit, and people can literally go and land on it and live on it for 6 months. I mean, it blows my mind what we can actually create when we put our mind to it. That's how amazing we all actually are. So these 3 things in front of you right now should not be too much to demand of a life for any of us, okay? So again, I really want you all just to think long and hard about what it is that you want, and I guess how many of these boxes that you're ticking, if you like, all right? And, again, if you haven't got a clear vision just yet of what it is that you want, a clearly defined goal, let's say, then I want you, as we move through these next slides in a minute, maybe just to borrow, I'm giving you things to borrow in this webinar, but just maybe borrow those ideas there on the screen. If you're not ticking all of those 3 boxes, start to entertain that idea that, you know what, that'd be quite nice. That'd be a good way to live, all right? So let's just assume that maybe alongside climbing Mount Everest or whatever other goals you might have, let's assume that this now becomes, whatever that star is that you're shooting for, okay? And then as we move on, I want you all to sort of look at this screen in front of you now and have that blue dot at the bottom of the screen represent where you are right now. Okay, so that dot for each and every one of you on the call, listening back to the replay, that represents your life right now. That represents everything that you have in your life right now. So it encompasses everything, the money that you're earning, the kind of job or business that you have and the results that you're getting within that, your relationships, your health, your well-being, literally everything. Where you are right now is represented by that blue dot at the bottom of the screen, okay? And then this one up here represents where you want to go. So that's your goal, okay? And as I said, some of you on this call might have very clearly defined goals, very clear ideas of where you want to go, and others might not if you've not really given much time and much thought to it. Again, going back a couple of years ago, I absolutely did not have a clearly defined goal of where I wanted to go. And I probably found it easier to tell people what I didn't want out of life than what I actually did want. But let's assume that doesn't apply to anyone listening to this webinar right now. And so let's just assume that where you want to go is up there and where you are is down here in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen. Well, then surely it's a case of just doing that, isn't it? You just get going in that direction. You know where you are, you know where you want to go, you just need to get moving in that direction. Well, obviously, you kind of probably know where I'm going with this one. If it was that obvious and that simple, you'd have to ask why so many people are stuck, why so many of us aren't actually living life completely on our own terms, why so many of us, a bit like me, maybe felt like there's a missing piece and I can't quite put my finger on it. And maybe you've got tons of great stuff going on in your life that you're really happy with. So it's not like you've got a life that's not comfortable, okay? But it's just not quite making you feel so alive. You're maybe not like that 80-odd-year-old guy that had tons of energy, which was, I feel like, what made me sit up and listen. So what's going on? What's stopping us? Well, a lot of people will tell you that the problem's up here, that it's with the goal. And as I said, if you've not got a goal, then that for sure is going to be part of it. That was definitely part of my problem. If you don't know where you're going, you haven't got a clearly defined idea or vision of where you're going, how are you ever going to get there? And I often use the analogy of saying to people, you'd never get in your car, right, and just start driving with no destination. That would seem pretty absurd, really. Okay, so we just wouldn't do that. But how many of us, again, think about it, how many people do you know, or maybe this even relates to you, actually go through their life like a bit like that? You know, that they're just sort of plodding onwards, but they don't really know where they're going. And again, I use an analogy of a football game and say it's a little bit like if there was a game of football going on and you took the goalposts away, what have you got left? You know, you've suddenly got lots of activity on the pitch still, but no purpose, no point to it all. And that was kind of a bit how I felt. So I was lacking direction. I was lacking something to go after. And I've since learned, you know, that actually we're meant to be going after something. We, in essence, sort of goal-seeking organisms, we are either growing or we're disintegrating. There is no standing still. So we feel our most alive when we're going after something. And really, as I say, I think that was what I discovered was the missing piece for me. I'd kind of plateaued. I'd ticked all these boxes, possibly without even really thinking that they were things I was even going after, but on some level I was. And then when I realized, if you like, that, you know, I had everything in my life that I thought I wanted, in inverted commas, I stopped going after anything. Well, I've since learned that there is no standing still. You're either going forwards or you're going backwards. You're growing or you're disintegrating. So no wonder, really, I felt a bit like something wasn't quite right, you know, because the reality is I wasn't growing. So I was in the disintegrating camp, which obviously doesn't feel good, okay? But in any case, it's not the goal, guys, that's stopping us from getting what we want, all right? What's really going on is down here, and it's with something that we call your paradigm, all right? And your self-image is a huge part of that. In fact, it is the most important part of your paradigm, really. So it's really important that we understand what it is. And in terms of that word paradigm, if you haven't heard that before, which, you know, again, you'll be forgiven, I certainly hadn't until I started sort of studying alongside Bob Proctor. What we mean by that really is it's just a type of mental program, okay? In fact, there's a definition on this next slide. So we say that your paradigm is a multitude of habits. And as I say, I like to think of it as a type of mental program. That makes a bit more sense to me. So just think of it a bit like how your computer has programs that are running on in the background all the time that kind of control the output. They control the functioning of your computer. It's same with your phone. You know, how often do we have to, you know, install updates and things on our phone? And we do it because we know if we don't update the programming on our phones, we're not going to get the most out of them. They're not going to be able to do all that they are capable of doing. Well, it's kind of the same with us, all right? So your paradigm is like a mental program. And we say that it's fixed in a part of your mind that we don't see all that much. We're not really familiar with what's going on. So it's fixed in your subconscious mind, okay? And the thing with this programming, guys, is that it has almost complete control over your habitual behavior. Now, again, for me, it wasn't really anything I thought about. So it's kind of, well, is that a big deal? Does that really matter? It's got control over my habits, yeah. Well, it kind of is when you really then take on board that last part of this sentence, that nearly all of your behavior is habitual. Nearly everything that you do, including the way that you think, okay, that's the key to remember. It's not just the habitual actions that we take. I mean, maybe that seems a bit more obvious. You know, we know that when we wake up on a morning, we're creatures of habit, we're creatures of routine. We'll move through the same sort of steps and stages as we go about our day. I wasn't having to consciously think as I put my jeans on this morning, oh God, is it right leg first or left leg? Crap, how did I do it yesterday? I'm not thinking, am I? I'm just getting dressed. I'm probably doing a million and one other things at the same time. So we're very aware of those kind of habits. But how many of us are aware of the way that we habitually think? Okay, and so your self-image is a huge part of that. Think of these ideas that you have about yourself. You think them habitually. You will think them all of the time without even really being aware of it. We have a dialogue going on inside our minds all the time, constantly. In fact, they say that the average person thinks something like 70 to 80,000 different thoughts a day. Well, I don't know about you guys, but there is no way I'm aware of, you know, even close to probably 90%, well, not even 90% of them. We're just not. And yet I'm a really keen student of this material. So I'm so much more consciously aware of what I'm thinking than I used to be. But I'm very aware that most of what I'm thinking is just running on habit. It's a program running on in the background. And so we're going to look at this program, if you like, in relation, very specifically today, in relation to our self-image and how that is showing up for us, okay? And to do that, I want to introduce you to this little graphic in front of you. And this is something that my clients see all the time. We use this a lot in thinking into results. And this little guy is called the stick person, all right? And don't be put off by the simplicity, all right? It's a really amazing graphic, actually, because it brings order to your mind, all right? We think in images. So if I was to say to each and every one of you today, okay, think of your car. I bet you there is no one that's thinking of the word car, C-A-R. You know, you're all recalling an image of your car in your mind instantly. And again, for all of you, it's going to be a little bit different. You've got different cars. So you're literally picturing your car. And we think like that. Pretty much everything that we think about, we think in images. We have cells of recognition in our brain that help us to do that. But if you say to somebody, right, okay, well, think of your mind. What does your mind look like? We don't really have a clear image to work with because none of us has seen the mind. Okay, some of us will think of the brain, but the brain isn't your mind any more than your hand is or your foot. Okay, it's just another part of your body. So a guy back in the 1930s actually came up with this drawing, and he said, look, we need to have clarity for something so important as our minds that show up, you know, for us, that really control what we go on to achieve in life. We need to really have an image, a clear image to work with. So he came up with this, as I say, complicated drawing, right, of the stick person. And he said, let the top circle represent the mind and the bottom one, the body. And he intentionally, you know, drew the top one, if you like, so much larger than the bottom one, because he wanted to illustrate that the body is actually nothing more than an instrument of the mind, okay? And he went on to say, you need to understand that the mind functions on two levels. We have our conscious mind, that educated part of our mind that we're all really quite familiar with, the part that school works with, that gathers all the information, all the knowledge, everything you've ever read. It's actually the part of you that you're using right now to listen to me. Okay, so you're gathering more knowledge right now from me. That's in your educated part of your mind, your conscious mind, okay? But we've also got this part of our mind, the bottom half of that circle, your subconscious mind. And it's in that part of our mind where we have this programming or your paradigm that sits. And so therefore, that's where your self-image is. That's where your internal self-image is, okay? And what I want you to realize is that most of what makes up your self-image right now, the beliefs, the ideas that you hold about yourself, of who you are, of what you're really capable of going on to do, most of those ideas you did not originate, okay? You did not come up with a lot of the beliefs that you were walking around with today about yourself. They have been, if you like, put into that subconscious part of your mind right from when you've been a small child. We're ultimately sort of a product of our environment, if you like. We haven't really got any choice other than to just buy in to the ideas that we are fed over and over and over again, repetitively, all the time. You know, so if you have been told, for instance, as a kid growing up, let's say, you know, oh, well, you know, she's the shy one. Yeah, he's the really outgoing one. And you're never told that just once, are you? These ideas that our parents give us, and they mean well. They don't really know any better half the time when they're doing it. But we will buy into these ideas, okay? And because we buy into them, these ideas control our belief system about ourselves, all right? And that is ultimately what's expressed, because actually what's going on in that part of our mind, in your self-image and in your subconscious mind, is actually responsible for a huge 96 to 98% of everything that you do, okay? So it doesn't matter what you believe about yourself on a conscious level. What's really showing up for you in your results is what you believe on a subconscious level, okay? And I just want to illustrate this. I often use an example with people saying how you can believe something on that conscious, educated level, okay, about yourself. So for instance, if I was to say to somebody, you know, do you think that you could double your income in the next 12 months? Depending on who I ask the question to, I'll get different answers, right? So if I'm speaking to somebody that's quite entrepreneurial, maybe they've got multiple streams of income, they've got several businesses, you know, they think in a really, you know, powerful way, if you like, in terms of what they can do, in terms of their earnings, then for them, that might not be much of a stretch, okay? But if I was to ask that very same question to somebody who, you know, let's say is an employee, they've worked in traditional employment all of their lives, they've had incremental increases in their salary year after year, do you believe you could double your income in 12 months? And they'd say, no, they didn't. That would probably be their gut reaction, okay? Now, if I was to say, what, you're saying it's impossible then? You really don't believe that you could, sort of double your income? Technically, yeah, it's possible. They start to sort of mull the idea around a little bit. And if I was to say, well, what if you had a gun to your head? What if your life depended on it? Like, then do you think you could double your income? Well, then, okay, and I know that feels a little bit dramatic, but literally, if you had no other choice and you had a gun to your head and you had to come up with a way to double your income in 12 months, do you think you could do it? I bet you'd be like, yeah, sure, I'll find a way. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but if I have to, then yes, I will. So consciously, you believe one thing, but subconsciously you're programming. Let's take that gun away, right? You don't have to do it quite in such extreme circumstances. Subconsciously, you believe something different about yourself. Technically, you could, right? Technically, you could do more than you're currently doing. But the belief system that you have about yourself of, what you think you're capable of doing is actually what's really governing your behavior. And that's why we say, if you like, that the body is nothing more than an instrument of the mind, that it's really what's going on, that combination, if you like, between the conscious and the subconscious, but bearing in mind that really the subconscious is actually what's really behind what we're doing, up to 98% of it. That's what's governing our behavior, all right? And it's our behavior, our actions, if you like, that are showing up for us in our results. Okay, that's why your self-image is so key. How you see yourself and what you believe about who you are and what you can do is going to govern your behavior. It's going to govern your actions. And ultimately, that's what plays into the results that are showing up for you in any and every area of your life. Okay, it's not just about money. It can be your health, your well-being, your relationships, anything. But the ideas that you hold about yourself are what's controlling your behavior, and that's therefore showing up for you. And because we can see and recognize this relationship between our behavior and our results, the trap that a lot of people fall into is thinking, okay, well, I just need to change my behavior then. I just need to focus on these habits. And if I can change them, of course, I'm going to get different results. Well, to begin with, okay, you will start to get a shift in your results if you do that. But the thing with that approach, you guys, that again, I want you all to sort of realize is that that approach only ever gives you temporary results. And what typically happens 9 times out of 10 is in a pretty short period of time, you find yourself back where you started. Okay, so what is going on? Why is that? Because it's so frustrating. Okay, well, we actually say that the mind works rather like what we call a cybernetic mechanism. All right, and I know it sounds like I'm trying to impress you with these words, paradigms and cybernetics, and make myself sound super important. It's actually nothing more than the equivalent of an autopilot on an aeroplane, okay? So let's look at it in that context, okay? Let's not overcomplicate things. We say that a cybernetic mechanism is really just a means of control, okay, in machines and in some animals. It's kind of something that keeps you locked in on a target. And remember I said that we're sort of goal-seeking organisms. That's really what we are, who we are. So let's look at how that works in this case, right? Say we've got this plane here that's taking off from London Heathrow, it's off to JFK in New York, okay? And so the white line represents the flight path. So it takes off as it was scheduled to do. And to begin with, it's doing great. It's just tracking along the flight path. It's going exactly where it's meant to be going, all right? And that's great. And if it continues like that, you can see that it's going to end up on target, land in New York exactly how it should. But what happens if this plane hits a bit of turbulence, okay, and then it gets knocked off course? And that's what you can see is happening here. Well, luckily, it's okay because the autopilot was set. The cybernetic mechanism was programmed before the flight actually, took off, all right? And so the instant that the plane then deviates away from its flight path or moves off course, the autopilot is activated and it kicks in and the plane moves back on course. And so you can see then that it auto-corrects, it just gets pulled back on course all the time, okay? And the reality is that this plane then could move off course, it could have turbulence, and it could end up being off course actually 80% of the way. It wouldn't matter. The autopilot would just keep kicking in and bringing it back on course, back on course. It's keeping it locked into its target, all right? Well, what's this got to do with us and our self-image? Well, a lot actually, because we say that your mind works in exactly the same way. This is how this programming, your self-image, is set. All right, let's take a look at it in terms of an example then, of a person that has a self-image, and let's say it's a poor self-image in this case in relation to their weight. All right, so they see themselves as somebody that's overweight. Okay, and so let the red line represent the results that they currently have. So the red line represents them being overweight. So it's results that they don't want, all right? So because they've got all this knowledge, all this information, remember, on a conscious level, they know what to do. They know what they should be doing, if you like, to get the results that they want. So their conscious mind, if you like, kicks in. It makes a decision that, right, I'm going to go on a diet then. So this person does that. They go on a diet. They switch up the kind of foods that they eat. They maybe start an exercise as well. And so what happens is they start to move away from the results that they've always had. They actually start to get the results that they want. They start to lose weight, okay? They're overriding. Remember that that subconscious part of your mind is responsible for about 96 to 98% of everything that you do. But actually that then means that your conscious mind does have a little bit of wriggle room, okay? It's got 2 to 4%, so you can override the programming, but it takes a lot of willpower, okay? So you've got to pretty much use all of your focus, all of your effort, if you like, to override. You've got to be consciously in control all the time. That's what's happening here now as this person starts to lose weight. But, and this is where the cybernetic mechanism and the self-image is so important. If that person does that, if they go on a diet and they start to lose weight, but they do it without changing the underlying self-image, then the change is only ever going to be temporary. So if they still see themselves as someone that's overweight, they still see themselves as someone that struggles with their relationship with food, they haven't changed the way that they see themselves. It doesn't matter what's happening on the outside, okay? Because what eventually is going to happen is that the cybernetic mechanism, if you like, that's part of your wiring, the way that we're built, okay, that's in your subconscious, it's going to kick in and it's going to pull you back on course. It's going to recognize that, hang on a minute, this isn't you. This isn't who you are. You've deviated away. It's almost that imposter syndrome. You know, we don't just obviously get it in relation to our weight. We can have it in all areas of our life. That idea of like, who do you think you are? This isn't you. Because your self-image is still totally in harmony with the person you always were. So what happens is that cybernetic mechanism kicks in, but it thinks it's doing you a favor, if you like. It's like, no, this isn't where you want to be. You want to be here. And it pulls you back on course. And so this is why, guys, we often have results in our life in all areas that just feel like they're a repeat. We have the same sort of scenarios showing up for us over and over again. And again, I want you all just think of your life again right now, where you are, and maybe just think of it in relation to where you were a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, or even 5 years ago, or maybe even 10 years ago. Have you changed much? You know, do you feel that fundamentally you're still the same sort of person getting the same sorts of results? You might have had some incremental gains along the way, but a lot of the time, again, as I say, if I look at the way I lived my life, and this isn't a criticism as such, but just for me, as I say, it felt like it had plateaued. It had really. For the past sort of certainly 7 to 8 years where I'd stopped going after anything, I absolutely was on that Groundhog Day scenario. And it wasn't that it was a bad life. I could always look at other people, if you like, and think, gosh, I'm so fortunate. I've got so much going for me. But it was still Groundhog Day. I wasn't doing anything differently. My programming, I was just living on autopilot, really. And actually, it's interesting, isn't it? Because that's an expression that we use. And there are lots of things in the expressions that we use every day that we don't realize just how close to the mark they are. So when we say that, you know, you're living on autopilot, you literally are. Your programming is taking care of things for you, because we couldn't deal with thinking about those 70 to 80,000 thoughts a day. We'd never get anything else done. So we need this programming, right? But we want the programming to work for us. like I say, we wouldn't accept it of our phones, would we? You know, we wouldn't walk around with a phone that's just not functioning at its best. We'd be straight on the phone to Apple or whoever, I need an upgrade. You know, this is ridiculous. I've got like a 10-year-old model here and everybody else can FaceTime and do this, that, and the other. We expect the best from things like that. But when was the last time you upgraded your programming? When was the last time you took a look at what you believe about you and your self-image and where it's taking you? And is it taking you where you want to go? All right. And that's really what we need to look at when we come back to this idea of where you are now and where you want to go. So bear with me. Okay, let's continue along the lines of what we were just looking at there with current results, and let's relate that back to where you are now and your self-image. All right, so the blue dot at the bottom of the screen is you. We've established, right, this is your current results in any and every area of your life, and that's represented now by that red line that's going along the bottom. That's your current results. So it stands to reason, guys, that your self-image at the moment is absolutely in harmony with your current results. Remember that I said at the beginning of this call, you'll never outperform your own self-image. You'll never do that. You'll never go beyond what you believe you're capable of doing. So if you take a look at where you are right now, you are there because you believed you could be, right? You are earning the money you're earning right now because you absolutely believe that that's what you're worth and that's what you're capable of doing. You have the health that you have because it's in harmony with your beliefs, okay, on a subconscious level. Your relationships, they're absolutely in harmony. The way you see yourself right now is without doubt in harmony with your current results. It can be no other way, all right? If you had a superior self-image, you'd be getting superior results, okay? And know that when you look at yourself, there will be other people that will be looking at you and looking at your results and thinking, oh God, man, I wish I could like do what he's doing. I wish I could be where she is, but I just can't because like blah, blah, blah. Whatever comes after the reason of why I just can't is a limiting belief. It's an idea that you're buying into that somebody else can do something that you can't do, that they're different to you. And the reality is, it's just what they are thinking about themselves. So if I go back to my case, okay, as I say, if you'd have said to me, let's say 2.5 years ago or 3 years ago, that I would be in 2 years' time, 3 years' time, owning my own business, doing something completely different, giving presentations to people all over the world, flying over to Canada 3 or 4 times a year and presenting to people that have come from all over the world to listen to what I have to say on the human mind and potential and success. Me, a chartered surveyor, I value hotels and houses. I don't do that. Do you see like the difference? And yet I didn't suddenly develop some superpowers. I'm not a different person. I just think some different ideas about myself. That's the reality, okay? And that's what you have to do. So if where you want to go is that blue dot at the top of the screen, represented by this red line and those results, but you're trying to get up there with the self-image that's down here with your current results, so all the ideas that you have of yourself currently, all your current beliefs that are in harmony with your current results, yet you're trying to create something way up there on a totally different level to where you are. You can't get there like that. You can't. You just feel like no matter how hard you try, no matter how much effort you put in, you're not getting there. All right. And I love to tell the story of a fly. Whenever I give any, sort of advice, indication of that idea of people that are just trying harder and harder and harder and not getting where they want, because it's such a beautiful story and it illustrates why this approach doesn't work, okay? And it's taken from one of my favorite books called U Squared by Price Pritchett. And he starts that book by saying how he is watching a life or death struggle take place, all right? And he's watching a fly burn out the last of its life's energies, banging up and down against a window pane. Okay, and you can see the fly's strategy, okay? It wants to be out to the freedom that it can see, and it is convinced that all it has to do is try harder, right? Just put some more effort in. Eventually, it's going to find exactly what it needs. It's going to find the crack in the glass, or it's going to figure out how to break through the glass, and it's going to get out. Well, we know that that doesn't work most of the time for the fly, right? We're sweeping them up. They've dried out on the windowsill. That fly is toast, okay? So we know that it's an approach that just doesn't make sense, yet it probably seems really logical to the fly, okay? The irony is, and isn't this nearly always the case, if that fly was to have turned around just 180 degrees, there was a wide open door. So it could have got to the freedom that it wanted, the goal that it was seeking, so much easier, with a lot less effort, in half the time, than this banging its head literally against the window, just burning itself out. It needed a different approach, you guys. It needed a different way of coming at things. And that's what you have to do to get from where you are to where you want to be, instead of trying harder and harder with more of the same, with the same beliefs, the same thinking that has got you your current results. You have to shift your self-image up here. You have to start to buy into some different ideas of who you are and of what you're really capable of doing. Okay. And again, I illustrate this. Just think about if you changed nothing else about yourself, right? You still had the same skills that you have right now. You changed nothing else about yourself apart from, the way you think. Like maybe, let's say you were brought up suddenly as the son or the daughter of Richard Branson, let's say, but nothing else changes, just that suddenly you grew up in a home with Richard Branson as your dad. Do you think that you'd believe some different ideas about who you are and what you're capable of? And do you think that that would impact your results differently of what you'd go on to achieve? And yet all you've done is buy into some new ideas, some new beliefs, okay? And that is the answer to how you start to move from where you are to where you want to go, okay? And it's an easier, much more effortless, if you like, approach. And you've got to do it by questioning your beliefs. That's the starting point, right? In terms of how we do it, how we go about doing this, you've got to realize that the beliefs that you hold about who you are and what you can do, any belief really, is nothing more than your evaluation of something, right? That's all a belief is. But as I said at the beginning, most of what you believe about yourself, you didn't actually choose. It's just been handed down to you from one generation to the next. You're a product of the environment. So as I said, if you'd have been brought up in a different environment with Richard Branson or Warren Buffett or someone like that as your father, let's say, or Michelle Obama as your mum, or Oprah Winfrey, then what would you believe? All right. So really start and question some of the beliefs that you hold about yourself. Again, one of the things that stands out with Bob Proctor and his story is this idea that actually he, was somebody that had very little formal education. He literally went to high school for just 2 months. He'd never really read any books. And he was brought up with a belief that you have got to, have a good education if you're going to earn a lot of money. You've got to have good business experience if you're going to get a good job. These were ideas and beliefs, if you like, that he bought into about himself, about who he was and what he was capable of doing. And because of those beliefs, they kept him locked in to a certain way of living. So he was someone that at age 26 was working as a fireman, and he was earning $4,000 a year and he owed $6,000. And that was not in any sort of likelihood about to change, because he was locked into a certain way of thinking, okay? And things changed for him, if you like, when someone took him under his wing. Kind of, he was mentored a bit, I suppose, in an old-fashioned way before we really had coaches and mentors the way we do today. And he was, if you like, handed Napoleon Hill's book, Think and Grow Rich. And because he studied that book every day, because he then listened to a recording of someone narrating that book every day, he started to get involved in some new ideas about himself, about what he was capable of doing. And because of that, because of how he thought of himself shifting, so did his results. And in just 12 months, he'd gone from earning $4,000 and owing $6,000 to actually earning $175,000 by the end of the year. And that was back in the 1960s, and $175,000 is a lot of money now. So what did he do? Well, we say there's only really 2 ways to shift this programming, to change your self-image, to change the way you think of you, all right? The first is an emotional impact. That's normally something negative, so it's not something we really want to go after. But for instance, say you are somebody, or you have someone close to you that suddenly gets a terminal illness, and it makes you take stock. It makes you realize, oh my gosh, life is short, actually. What am I doing? What do I really want? This isn't how I want to be living. And you just go out and you bet on yourself. You decide that, screw this, I'm not so bothered about what everybody else thinks all of a sudden. I'm going to go after and do what I want to do. And suddenly things that you thought were risky, you no longer think are risky. So it's something that has a real kind of sudden impact on you. It shifts things very quickly of how you're thinking, all right? But we don't typically want to go after that. And we certainly don't want to be sitting around waiting for something like that to happen before we take control of our life and where it's going. So the only other way, guys, that you can shift your self-image, shift your programming, is really the way that it got in there in the first place. So we say it's the constant spaced repetition of a new idea, okay? And that's really how most of us have come to believe the things that we believe about ourselves, because they're ideas that we've heard over and over and over again repetitively, okay? So if we want to change them, we've got to start to buy into some new ideas. We've got to start to feed our mind some new information about who we are. We've got to start to study us a bit more, which is really what I do with my clients. That's what we're all doing. We're really learning about who we really are. And as you start to get a deeper understanding of who you are, of how your mind works, and just what you're capable of doing, and you're engaging with those ideas on a daily basis, what do you think is going to happen to the way that you start to think about yourself? Right? Suddenly you're going to start to buy into some pretty cool ideas about yourself, of who you are. But for most of us, you know, even though we know this, even though I'm sharing all of this information with you here now, so you're gathering some information, you're learning some new ideas about who you are with me right here now. So even though you know it, it's very difficult on your own to go and just implement that into your life. Because typically what happens is the programming, I mean, this is where it feels a bit sort of like a catch-22. The programming that's controlling the way you think pretty soon kicks in and tells you, you don't need to do this. This is crazy. Like, what, you're going to read that again? You're going to listen to that same recording again? Are you nuts? You know, not everybody else isn't doing this. This seems crazy. And again, you've then got to ask yourself, well, yeah, everybody else isn't doing it, but is everybody else living their lives the way they want? Are they getting the shifts, or are they just on Groundhog Day? Are they just really, you know, living in harmony with their programming? Okay, so this, guys, is really why we say a lot of the time that if you're really serious about doing this, if you're really serious about shifting some of these beliefs, shifting the way that you look at you, then really you can't do it on your own, okay? Think of, I don't know, someone that is a professional tennis player, athletes, you know, people in the sports world, or people, actors, people on the stage, they have coaches. You'd never expect them to go and achieve anything of any consequence without somebody else that's already been there, you know, that's figured it out ahead of them, if you like, to do it. That's really what Bob Proctor did. You know, he changed his life so dramatically that he had these amazing results. He'd pretty soon taken his earnings to over $1 million, and he was blown away by it. But he had no clue what he'd done, okay? And he said it took him 9.5 years to then go and figure out what he'd done. And then once he'd figured out the process, once he realized that it wasn't chance or luck, that actually success is a system. And if you follow a certain sort of formula, if you like, you can pretty much guarantee that you can go on to achieve whatever it is you want to achieve. But it took him 9.5 years to figure that out. And he was already there. He already had the results. So again, for us, going back to that slide where your self-image is in harmony with your current results, to try and figure out how to get where we want to be without the benefit of somebody else that, if you like, has already walked that path, it's a tough thing to ask, really. So again, I just want to encourage you all to just really think that if you're serious, if you're really serious about what you want out of life, especially as we're on the cusp of moving into a new year, when people really start to think about setting goals and what do I want out of 2019? Do I want it to be different to, you know, the previous year that I've just had? If you're serious about that, then I emailed all of you before this webinar started, and I've actually opened up my calendar for the next couple of weeks, actually, with some slots where I'm offering free discovery sessions. So if any of you would like to understand just a little bit more about that, then I encourage you to just click into that email, okay, and just book a session. It's just a call, you know, and we can dig in a little bit deeper about what it is that you want. And I can explain to you in more detail of just how this all works, okay, and how it sort of works for my clients. So again, given that your programming really controls a lot of your actions, if you leave it until after this webinar, if already at this point, and we're nearly finished, you're thinking, yeah, I resonate with some of that. Actually, I wouldn't mind knowing a bit more. If you fall into that camp, then I encourage you to find that email now and just think, you know what? Yeah, I wouldn't mind knowing a little bit more about this. Because what typically happens when we don't act on an idea straight away is that life then just carries on and gets in the way. And before we know it, we're back onto that pattern of procrastination and the Groundhog Day approach that's got us our current results, that keeps us locked into where we currently are. Okay. And as I say, I get it, because that was me. I lived that way for a long time. Okay. Just to wrap up though, guys, got a couple more slides. I want you to all realize, and hopefully by now you are starting to realize this, that actually it's not who you are that's holding you back at all. It's who you think you're not. All right. It's the limiting beliefs again. It's what you're buying into that you can't do. If you honestly think, right, back to that example of if you were brought up and you had Richard Branson or Oprah Winfrey, one of those guys as your parent, right, and you changed nothing else, okay, you don't suddenly, sort of acquire the ability to run faster, to think quicker, any of those things. You are still just you, but you've been brought up in a different environment. If you honestly think that that would shift the way you think about yourself and therefore enable you to go after different results, then deep down you know that the only thing getting in your way is a bunch of ideas that you have been fed, if you like, about yourself and what you can do over and over and over again. All right. So that's really the truth of what's getting in your way. And I want you all to come back to where we started on this webinar with that idea of you've actually got infinite potential. You actually can do so much more, be so much more. You've got everything you need within you right now. You just have to start to recognize it within yourself. That was really what happened with me. Once I started to study who I really was, the fact that I was capable of so much more, my external world started to change, and it started to change really quickly, okay? But it's got to start here. This is the last slide that I just want to leave you with today. This is a powerful idea, right, around decision. This idea that if you haven't decided on what it is that you want, on where you're going, okay, how are you ever really going to get there? What is it that you want? What is it that you want to even just think about in terms of who you are? What are some of the beliefs that you'd like to start to buy into of who you are and what you're capable of? If, say, you work in sales, where would you like your sales to be? What do you want from your earnings? What do you want from your relationships, from your health? How you use your time? How you use your time is hugely controlled by your programming. Again, we all get the same 24 hours in a day. None of us get any more or any less than anybody else. But again, because we're creatures of habit, because of the way we think and because we think habitually, a lot of that is automatic. And so if you want to change any of these areas of your life, you've got to start to change the way you see yourself in relation to them. Okay. And that starts with a decision. All right. So that's the one thing that you can actually do today. Before you leave the call, or certainly straight after, I'd encourage you to just sit down, before you get back on with your day, take 5 minutes. What are some of the decisions that you're going to make for yourself? Maybe just for 2019, just think about, right, what do I want that to look like? Make some decisions around it. Where do I want to be 12 months from now? Where do I want to be 6 months from now? Because again, if you procrastinate on that decision and think, oh, I'll get around to it in January, or I'll get around to it, whenever, before you know it, it's March. And then you're looking forward to your summer holiday, and then you're into the summer, and then the kids are back at school in September. And then before you know it, you're back around here again at the end of the year. And what did you achieve with the last 12 months? So really take it seriously. Really think about the power of decision, guys. I realized that that's what I did that day that I listened to Bob on that podcast. I really made some decisions, I suppose, about my life, about where it was going and about what I wanted from it. And I started on that path, and I've never looked back. I've achieved more in the last 2.5 years, honestly, than I did certainly in the previous 10, probably in the previous 20, if I'm really honest. And I'm nobody special. I'm really not. I just started to believe some different ideas about myself. And I see it in my clients. That's the wonderful thing. I've got a girl that's been with me just over 6 months now. And she wrote me a beautiful testimonial just recently saying how she's grown more in the last 6 months than she did in her entire 20s. somebody else that's been with me for just 8 weeks, and he's been able to multiply his income so much that his wife's been able to give up work. It's incredible. Yet nothing really changed other than the way that these people were thinking. So if that's something, if some of those ideas are something that resonate with you, then I really encourage you to, just look into it a little bit more. Go into that link, into my diary, book yourself a call with me. I would love to speak to you, because I haven't got to see any of you today on this call anyway. So I would love to speak to some of you, and just let's get a clear plan going for where you want to be in 2019 and what you want that to look like. Okay. Now, guys, I am aware that I think I've probably overrun by a few minutes. Remember, I started by saying chatterbox is one of my labels, and I haven't outgrown that one yet. But I really hope that you found that helpful. I mean, if you don't have to rush off, if any of you have got any questions, or if you've got any comments or feedback, type something in the chat. I think I can still see in there. But otherwise, I'll leave that open just for a few minutes. But otherwise, anybody that, needs to jump off, please jump off and do that. And I'm just looking in that chat. I don't think anything's coming in. I think I've stunned you all into silence. But yeah, any of you that have got any questions, oh, thank you, Bernice. I see your comments. That's lovely. Yeah, if anybody's got anything or any feedback, I'd love to hear from you. And as I say, hopefully I look forward to speaking to some of you, and reach out if you didn't get that link through, and any of you watching the replay, hopefully you've all got it. But if links aren't working, if technical issues are a problem, just email me. I think you've probably all got your email. And watch out in your inboxes, guys, as well. I will send you all, I've got a little takeaway on decision that I always love to share with people that come to my seminars. It's a really powerful article that Bob wrote, actually, so I will email that out to everybody. But I will leave it there, you guys. So thank you all so much for joining me. Go and have a wonderful rest of your day. And thank you to everybody that's listening to this on the replay. Hope to catch up with you all soon. And just have a really great end to 2018, you guys. Don't slack off for these last few weeks. All right, everybody, take care. Bye-bye.